line today. I appreciate you all spending your time to think about this, and obviously this is critically important to everybody. Let me just, what we're going to cover today is what I want to start with is first, why am I talking to you? What's my experience that you can somewhat believe what I'm saying? And then I want to start with what your questions are. It's important for me that when I address, what you really want to know, and I'd like to get that up front. So if you can start putting that in the chat now, or whoever you want to communicate that, because I'd much rather address your questions that you really want to know about than talk about something that you don't want to know about. So we'll do that. Then we're going to talk about the biggest thing that I think that happens when you turn 22, or when your kid with a disability turns 22, is the end of the educational rights. That's probably the biggest piece that affects you, or the second biggest piece. The biggest piece is if your child has an intellectual disability or autism, the Department of Developmental Disabilities. Then we're also going to talk about healthcare, talk about education, employment, living arrangements, financial planning, and being a legal adult. So first off, about me, my biggest credential is I have a 38-year-old son who has Down syndrome, who I actually just spoke to about 2 minutes before this call. But he's the one that really grounds me. I understand exactly where you folks are. I've been through a whole lot, as you all have. But since he turned 22 quite a few years ago, I'm familiar with that experience. I'm also a disability rights lawyer, so I've been doing that for a number of years, actually more than 20 years at this point. I've also been in the state legislature, so I understand how the big picture and policy works. And I'm also, I have a PhD from Brandeis, where my focus was on disabilities, and particularly intellectual disabilities, and the transition of folks with intellectual disabilities to adulthood and what that looks like. And then also I'm a web designer. I'm the founder of specialneedstrustsonline.com, which is on the bottom of, I think, every page of this presentation. And that's a nonprofit organization that provides low-cost documents, estate planning documents for people who have families with disabilities. So now I'm going to start with, do we have questions in the chat? No questions. What does everyone want to know? I will ask that particularly right now. What's the burning question that you have? I think it would be helpful to get that. So if you want to put something in the chat, or if you feel comfortable, I don't know if it's okay with you, Andrea, if they raise their hand or they connect directly.
Yep, just raise your hand and I'll just pause the recording. Or put it in the chat. That's the quickest way. And we'll give you a minute. We'll give you time to think and reflect. Here's one. Here we go. Oh, good question. Did your son go to a residential school prior to 22? And did that have any impact on what he got at age 22?
And yes, and yes.
Ooh.
So it did. And those are kind of under the, and it also happened, there was a lot of things that happened at the time. One is I'm not sure it works exactly the same way, but I'm pretty sure it does now that I'm thinking about it. I don't have a lot of experience recently. At the time when my son transitioned to 22, he was in a residential program. So the transition to 22 was reasonably easy. It was also at the year that they were doing the Boulay settlement, which you probably haven't, the families probably haven't heard of this, the people in the field have. The Boulay settlement was, they had a waiting list in Massachusetts for people to receive services at 22. The waiting list at the time had 12,000 people. There was a lawsuit filed against the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that said you can't make these people wait. It's not fair. What happened? So they sued the department, which was then called, unfortunately, the Department of Mental Retardation. They sued them. The department worked with the lawsuit, and I've talked to the lawyer that actually filed this case. First time lawyer ever did anything like this at all. Didn't know exactly what they were doing. but they got a full settlement that said that these 12,000 people on the waiting list had to be placed, and they had to be placed. I think they gave them like a 2-year period to place those individuals. What happened was there was a guy who was placed under the Boulay settlement and then decided to move back home with his family. And that opened up a slot at a group home that we had seen and thought was a great fit for my son at the time. So he actually bounced into that, which is probably a long answer. The answer to that, I think, is one of the things that you look at, and I'll get into this a little bit more, is what does the person who's turning 22 need? And they actually do, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that later, but does the person really need that type of residential or 24-hour services? And if the kid is, or the young adult at 22 is already in a residential program, it's probably because they need that type of intensive services. So it's likely if the person is in a residential program prior to 22, it's likely that they will stay in that type of, that they have intense needs that it's going to require them to do that. Any other questions, or is there a follow-up to that one?
No, not yet.
All right, let me just.
Not yet, but I'm sure they'll have more as we go.
All right, let me move these things around here a bit. All right. So the first thing, which you probably already know, is that the right to an education stops at 22. And it actually stops on their 22nd birthday, which is not a very great birthday present. But so in Massachusetts, you have the right to the education, actually in any state. You have the right to an education until you graduate from high school. Massachusetts, as you know, in order to graduate from high school, you need to pass MCAS. What happens is if you pass MCAS and you graduate from high school, typically that ends the right to an education. There are provisions that say that if that's happened and you still require services, that you may be entitled to services after 18. But after 22, that's when all the right to an education and services comes to an end. The right to an education is guaranteed. After 22, nothing is guaranteed. A lot of people refer to that turning 22 as dropping off the cliff. It can be a very challenging time, and I'm going to get into a little bit of how that's figured out. It's also subject to the legislature approving money to that line item in the budget to provide services for them. If you have a child turning 22 in the next year or two, you'll see in the legislature they talk about turning 22 in that line item, particularly the ARC. Leo Sarkisian and ARC Massachusetts is heavily involved in lobbying the legislature to get that money out there, but it's critical on how DDS is funded, that be out there. Continuing on education, one of the things to consider, and I just want to talk about it, is you have a right to an education at 22. In Massachusetts, there is now a lot of opportunity for students with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities and autism to attend Massachusetts public colleges and universities. So that's all community colleges, that's all state universities, and that's all the UMass campuses. I think with the exception of the medical school, I don't think that was excluded from the provision, but there is an opportunity now for anyone with an intellectual disability or a developmental disability that was unable to pass MCAS and unable to graduate from high school to still attend classes in any of our public colleges and universities. I can talk more about that if anybody is interested in it. You also need to look at working on employment and support vocational services. We talked a little bit more about that. We talked about that in the turning 18 one last week. But there's lots of other programs that are out there. There's mass rehab, job training programs, there's the Commission for the Blind, there's a whole number of resources that are out there after you turn 22 and some before 22. So this is the big one. The Department of Developmental Services. You need to really be continually working. I don't know how, I guess, can we do a survey of how old people's kids are at this point? I don't know if you can do that, Andrea. Maybe I'm putting you on the spot. We probably should have discussed this earlier.
That's right, 21, 14, 20, 20, 21. Yeah, most of them on the registration was between 14 and 22, I'd say. 21.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of them right at that 18 to 22, 16.
Yeah, great. So some of them are younger than I thought that would be on this call. So
18
it's
and a half,
really
19. We got it all. Yeah.
awesome. Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. So you really need to begin with your school system, working with them. They should be working on a transition plan to age 22, beginning at age 14. So Massachusetts law says the transition program, transition planning needs to start at age 14. DDS does get notified of this, and this is how they call it a class of turning 22. That's everybody in the state who's turning 22, who is potentially eligible for services under the Department of Developmental Services. And like I said before, that's people with an intellectual disability, people with developmental disabilities, and people on the autism spectrum. Since about, I don't know the date of the law, but about 10 years ago, the legislature expanded what the department, DDS, I'll refer to them as, what DDS was doing for individuals with autism. And after that law was passed, individuals with autism do not need to have an intellectual disability to get services from DDS. The concept of that is that some folks with autism, as you know, can be very intellectually capable, but just don't have the particular social or life skills that they need to be successful. DDS is now trying to fill that role and does provide services for those individuals. So it's an individual who may not have an intellectual disability would still be potentially eligible for services under DDS. So this is the magic sauce that I need to talk to you about with DDS, and that maybe it addresses the person who talked about residential services. What happens with, and this is the way it's supposed to work, it doesn't always work this way, but this is the way the system is designed to work. If you have a kid who's about to turn 22 in the next coming fiscal year, the fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So if you have a kid who's turning 22 within that fiscal year, that next fiscal year, that's the class of the turning 22 class that the legislature now has to figure out what they're going to do. So what DDS does is that they assign someone to your kid's case. They have to come out to your home or meet with the kid. And then they do this evaluation that they call MASCAP, where they go through and they ask all these questions. You'll get a questionnaire from Department of Developmental Services when your kid is about to turn 22, and it's going to ask you all these questions about your kid, like, can they take a shower by themselves? Can they toilet by themselves? You know, how long can they be left home by themselves? My recommendation is don't make your kid look that great. Be as realistic as possible about your kid's abilities. Sometimes parents tend to, you know, gloat over their kids, how wonderful they are, blah, blah, blah. You know, they can do this and that and that. This is not the place to do that. This is looking at the at your kid and potentially what kind of services they need. And they end up from MassCap, they get this grid of like probably like 10 different items, and they score each person. From that score, they then look at the number of dollars they get from the legislature for the turning class of 22. And essentially it's supposed to be a mathematical division of how do we divide the services to pay for the money to pay for the services that this class turning 22 needs. So you can get everything from residential services to like 10 hours or 5 hours a week of services. There's a disability rights activist who talks about the skateboard and the Cadillac, right? Because you can end up with a skateboard or you can end up with a Cadillac. And the Cadillac is the 24-hour, all that services. And the skateboard is that 5 hours of services. And you can have a kid with significant disabilities who only gets 5 to 10 hours of services a week. And that can be hugely challenging to families. So the point of this conversation with you is, one, when they send you that questionnaire in the mail or however they send it to you now, be very realistic about your kids' abilities and what they need, how they function. I would advise you to be as tough as possible on your kid, just to make sure that they get the services that they actually need and you don't get shortchanged in this process. The other thing is to pay attention to the funding of turning 22. We're actually in that budget cycle right now in the spring. So right now, ARC-Mass and lots of other organizations are lobbying the legislature to say, you need to fund turning 22 and you need to fund turning 22 because I have this kid who has these disabilities, who needs these services, and we really need that to be successful for this kid. My next one that I'm doing that I have to leave is I'm actually preparing a whole group of people that are going to Washington to lobby Congress on disability rights issues. But you also need to do this in Massachusetts. One of the things you can do, which I wasn't planning on talking about now, is if you Google, where do I vote? Just Google that, it'll come up, where do you vote? And you put in your address, and then it'll tell you who your state representative is and who your state senator is. You should send either, after this call, you probably should send each of those people an email and tell them about your kid and why they need to fund turning 22. And that can have a tremendous impact on the dollars that go to turning 22. I'm going to stop now because you may have a lot of questions. And I'm moving reasonably fast, or I'm talking reasonably fast anyway. I'm not fast, I'm moving. But if you have any questions, you want to put them in the chat or raise your hand or whatever you want to do.
We do have some in the chat. A couple of them are very, specific. So,
Yeah.
But just backing up to a secondary question from your son going to residential, what characteristics did your son have that qualified him for residential? We get that question a lot.
So the character,
and if it's too personal, of course I get that.
No, I'm happy to share that because that's my qualification as the dad with experience. And it was, so I'll try to make this as brief as possible. My son was turning 22. He ended up in residential services because my town was not providing the transition services that I knew they should have provided because I had already won a lawsuit against one of the cities in Massachusetts that the law laid out what transition services should be, and my son wasn't getting them. So we ended up actually suing the town. And then since they couldn't provide the services, they sent him to residential. He has Down syndrome. He functions like, I don't know how to describe, like everybody's functioning is different. His speech is terrible. The reason why I talked to him, he was just in the gym working out. He now lives alone in an apartment with supports. And he's lived there for 3 years at this point, is doing fantastic. But at that time, they were kind of just jumping in that way. But the big issue is how long can the person stay by themselves? That's the big deal, I think, is and what kind of needs that person has. I hope that answered the question. You can follow up if you'd like. Other questions?
Muted you by mistake. I'm so sorry. Yeah, we do. A lot of more questions about when you're in school. So I'm not sure. I don't know if you want to get into what to ask for when they're still in school, or if we just want to, because we have such a short amount of time, if we want to just address post 22. So education and correspondingly right to an education is a very broad term. Are there rules, guidance that can be followed to know what we can request? And I imagine that's when you're still in school. If someone, yeah. Does that make sense, Tom? Right to an education. Oh, you're on mute, Tom.
Huh.
There you go. Sorry.
So you have the right to anything in transition services. I think the way you should think about transition services is imagine your kid as an adult. What do you expect of him or her at that time when they're an adult? Do you expect them to live alone? Do you expect them to be independent? Do you expect them to be working? Do you expect them to be supported in some way? Then the transition services are anything to get them to that goal. If the goal is to be living independently, and working, maybe they need to take some college classes. Maybe they need a transition program. Maybe they need life skills. Maybe they need some academic stuff to prepare them for a job. Maybe they need some work experience or an internship. Maybe they need some socialization thing. Maybe they need speech. It's anything they're gonna need to get them to be the most independent and successful adult they should be. Any other?
Yeah, there's more questions, so I don't know if you want to address them now or wait.
I think this is the meat of what we need to talk about for your group. So okay. I'm happy to do it.
All right. Yeah, we'll keep going. So backing up. So since DDS doesn't work with people until 22 or until they graduate, are there ways around it to get at least some services such as job coaching?
From before they're 22? I think that if the person needs, I think if the person needs job coaching prior to 22, you're saying?
Yep.
That would be covered through your school program. Your school district would be responsible for that. So I guess that's the answer to that. There's also Mass Rehab would be available for certain services as well. Mass Rehab, I don't have their website on this thing. Maybe I'll stick it on before I send it over to Andrea to send out to you folks.
Yeah, putting that in there. Yes, that's right. There's different ways. The school, DDS isn't gonna do any of that until they're no longer in school. So there are other options to work with, but definitely your school should be doing that.
Yeah,
Macy works only through partnerships with districts. That gives districts full right to decide who gets what. Are there any ways around it to get great benefits of Macy without district support?
Yes. A new law went through and was passed last summer that opened up all colleges and universities to anybody in Massachusetts with an intellectual disability. So that's, you can actually, if you actually go to the Macy website though, for those that you don't know, I don't even know how to, I don't even know how the entire Macy acronym is, but if you want more information on that, maybe even Andrea can give you that, or I can give Andrea the contact person that's best handled to suit that. But that's something you should absolutely be pushing. That's actually what my doctoral dissertation was on, was folks with intellectual disabilities attending colleges. So that's my area of expertise outside of the legal side.
Definitely. Yeah, we just have a presentation on that. So we'll get that information out to you guys as well.
Great.
Not enacted yet. That's the problem. They're working on it. So it's not accessible quite yet, but they're working on it.
Yep. But it is the law in Massachusetts. So that's what you got on your side.
Exactly. What happens if you can't get residential before age 22? Oh gosh, and you die. Could the child go to a shared living collaborative, like the one in Merrimack? Oof.
So, if that's, where what's available to the kid is looked at. So if you die prior to the kid's 22, that would probably be more of a educational type placement than a DDS type placement.
Correct.
And then they look at emergency services too for people whose family members become, don't have their parents anymore at any age. That's a factor that the DDS and the social workers will be looking at, and caseworkers will be looking at.
May a district legally refuse signing dual enrollment form to get community college tuition discount for a student older than 18 but younger than 22 and still in district care?
Well, they can do whatever they want, but to force them, you may need to file for hearing with the Bureau of Special Education Appeals, which is how you enforce special educational rights. So if that's the case, you can send me an email, go to the website on the thing and send me an email or something, and I can have a brief conversation with you about that. But sometimes you have to sue the school districts to do that.
It's tricky. So like Tom said in the first slide, if they're still in school, it's the school's responsibility, unless they've accepted the diploma or turned 22. Otherwise, then it goes into the adult service system. So everything you guys are speaking of covers under the school until that happens. So it's this little, but like he said, there's some intensive supports that can be built in to kind of prevent that. So if you're DDS eligible, that might be an option, but otherwise it's the school's responsibility, which gets tricky.
Yeah, and the issue, even with the new law, I think that it needs, I haven't looked at the law in a few months, so I don't remember exactly what it says. I thought that the team may still need to be part of that process. I don't remember exactly what we did in the law right now. I'd have to look back at that. Any other questions on this?
That's it for now.
Okay. The other issue is healthcare and insurance. Is Mass Health, and also under Massachusetts and federal law, your children have a right to be covered under your insurance until the age of 26. There's also a provision under health insurance policies that if you have a kid with a disability, you have to file this paperwork, and they would be eligible, if at least, I think they do it every 5 years, because I do it. My son is also covered under my health insurance as well as Mass Health. Mass Health is the first, my insurance goes first, and then whatever they don't cover, Mass Health is supposed to pick up. That's the way it goes. Any questions on health insurance?
No, but we had a couple more questions from the prior slide, if you don't mind.
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
Is community college available after age 22?
Yes. And so is the whole program that we talked about. So the new law applies to students after 22 as well. So Macy was only prior to 22. That was part of our movement to get rid of it or to modify it, so that it's post 22, you're eligible to attend colleges.
Yep, it's pretty awesome. Is there anything families can do if they are told their young adult is on a wait list for placement at age 22?
I don't think they should be on a wait list. I haven't even run into that one, actually.
And it depends what wait list I think we're speaking of too.
Yeah.
So Anne, if you want to clarify that, or if you're talking about residential, that's different than like a day program. So again, it depends on what placement you're speaking of.
Yep.
Community programs, like a community day program. Yes. Yeah, so I think what's happening, at least in our catchment area is, families, there's so many day programs that have slots that don't have staffing. So people are being kind of put on.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Oh, and I guess that's.
People are waiting years depending on the level of need for the person. And that's due to the staffing crisis, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then, again, we could get into self-direction and all that stuff, but I think that
Yeah.
maybe we can get to that at the end if we have some time on what that looks
Yeah.
like.
Okay.
What are the benefits? We're going to shift gears to insurance. What are the benefits of having primary family insurance for an adult child? Right now, we are able to access certain therapies because we have Blue Cross Blue Shield and then Mass Health as secondary.
So we kept my son on it. He needed hearing aids, and my health insurance paid for half of his hearing aids. And I don't believe Mass Health was gonna. I'm not sure how Mass Health does it. We ended up there's certain reasons to do that. You can also get reimbursed by Mass Health if you cover your kid under your own insurance policy. And you just go to the Mass Health website, and you can click in and make that application, so they can give you some reimbursement for the health insurance that you're paying for your kid.
I think you addressed this. Can a child be covered under a guardian's insurance versus the parents? Oh, good question. Good question.
I don't know the answer to that one.
Right. Good question.
Yeah.
Right. If they're the legal guardian versus.
Yeah. I don't know what that. I haven't had that before.
People waiting years. Backtrack to the DDS thing. Does that law case that you mentioned before come into play if there are families waiting and individuals waiting for day programming?
So that was done as a consent decree. So it wasn't actually a decision. They didn't go to court, and there wasn't a legal decision. That was an agreement between DDS and the families at that time. So it doesn't have legal precedent. But there's the fact that it happened before. Right now, I think I haven't been involved in that waitlist part right now, but it seems to me that there should be the ability to do that. The only thing is that there's no right to these services in Massachusetts, and that's the fundamental issue.
Exactly.
There's no legal right to these issues. That's the difference between the prior to 22 with the educational system and your city and town being responsible, and the post 22. There's no, there's a right before 22, after 22, there's no right.
Exactly.
But there's a good legal argument for that anyway. But anyway.
And then I always say there's human rights and civil rights, there's
Right,
those rights
right.
that come into play.
Yeah.
Or ADA accommodations, that kind of stuff, but it's not the
Yeah.
entitlement of services, which is where the law isn't on our side in this case.
Yeah.
Another one, can a parent of a special needs adult child children become group homes or caregivers in a shared living collaborative in order to increase the supply of safe places for our adult children? Are there special training programs out there?
Are there special? I guess the first question is, can you do that? There's a law called the Real Lives Law, which allows you the point of the law is to say, like what we talked about before. You have a kid who's turning 22. They go through the MASCAP. They got this number. Then the state allocates how much money they're going to be able to pay for that kid's services. Under the Real Lives Law, you're supposed to be able to take that budget for that particular person and go out and buy services yourself to support that kid. So if that kid was supposed to get, say, $100,000 in services, you should have a budget of $100,000 that you can then figure out how do you support that kid. And you can do that under the Real Lives Law. There's a lot of controversy that, there's still, the law went into effect quite a few years ago, and they try to do new regulations. They floated new regulations last fall that really didn't address what they needed to do and were contrary to the law itself. So there's opportunity to do that, I guess, is my short answer.
Right. It's not perfect, but certainly there's opportunity.
Yeah.
It's just, is it happening frequently?
Yeah. Yeah.
Autism. I'm going to put autism housing pathways in here too, because Kathy Boyle is the guru when it comes to this stuff. Housing, especially in Massachusetts, and getting creative with it. Train and partake. That law, we talked about that. I think we're good to go.
All right. This is living. It depends on your, where your kid is, but there's all sorts of opportunities for where they're going to live. The one that is, so if your kid can be reasonably independent, and probably lots of the kids on this call can be, one of the things you should be doing is applying for a Section 8 certificate. A Section 8, you go to your local housing authority and you apply for a Section 8 certificate and apply for housing, whatever they have there. My understanding is there's lots of money being sunk into that, or being planned to sink into that after this new budget comes out this year. So there's going to be lots of opportunity. Section 8 is a federal housing program. It's based on income. And when you apply for it, this waiting list can be very long, can be years and years. But if you get it, you essentially get a certificate that allows you to go to any market rate apartment, and they have to rent it to you if you have the Section 8 certificate, if the Section 8 certificate is going to cover enough money. How Section 8 works is you're responsible for 25% of your income to pay for the housing. So say you're getting, you get $1,000 a month, you're responsible for $250 to pay for your housing. And I'll use my son for an example. He's now living under a Section 8 certificate. He lives in a luxury apartment. It's all paid for by his Section 8 certificate. He's responsible, his share of the $200 and something, he's responsible for paying all his utilities. That's his share, but they pay his rent at this apartment. So that's like the biggest ticket thing. If you have a kid who's going to be reasonably independent, you apply for the Section 8 certificate. I think we talked about this last week. Oh, it did come up last week. So it's important to do that. There's also federal and state housing programs besides Section 8 certificate. What I also said, if the person with a disability gets a Section 8 certificate and needs a live-in support person, it's possible to get a 2-bedroom apartment for that person, one for the individual with a disability and one for the support person who's going to support that person. And the reason for that is that comes from the Americans with Disabilities Act, because it allows that person to access housing. So there's also federal state housing, there's shared living programs too that are and DDS sponsored group homes. There's just lots of options, but it's something you need to be thinking about and working on. Any questions on that? I think there's a few more questions that came up in the chat since I've been talking.
Does it make sense to move to the town where the Section 8 waiting list is shorter? And is there likely informal information about what towns with shorter waiting time for Section 8?
So I don't know where that is right now. And now there's more collaboration among towns, especially if you're in a small town. I don't have the answer to that. You could try Legal Services Corporation, and there's legal services. If you Google legal services for your community, you could try just giving them a call and asking them that question, because they're going to have access to that information probably. Okay. So that would be a good thing to do. And I think all this is done now through the web. So it's a different experience than when I went through this process.
For sure. And that link I put in the Autism Housing Pathways, again, so the website's there's a lot on it, but it has all these links coming from it. Kathy Boyle, again, is kind of our guru in Massachusetts. So definitely check that out for these questions. Well,
I think I'm gonna save that myself.
Yes, you should. It's fantastic. And we're working on it constantly about trying to tweak it. She's the guru. Another question, 100 grand seems like an extremely rare budget to get for one child. What is an average DDS budget for an individual?
So I don't know what that answer is. I've been out of the legislature now for a while, so I don't really know. I think if someone's in residential care, that budget's going to be big. Because so they need 24-hour living, and then they need a day program and work. There's a lot. I think 100,000. It's going to be more than 100,000 to support someone like that. So the numbers, like about 10 years ago, the numbers were probably like for someone who only needed a day program were very low. But there's all sorts of options out there to support someone. I'll talk a little bit. Let me just talk about my son because he's sometimes unique. He did live in a group home for a long time, but he decided that he didn't want to do that anymore and that he wanted to live in his own apartment. We took the Section 8. He got his own apartment. He does go to a day program 3 days a week, but he also gets services from a local community services organization that provides 10 hours of support to him. And what that is someone that comes in and takes him out to do things, or they go shopping or whatever it is to support him. So there's ways to sort of piece your program together without using the Real Lives bill or, you know, going through that process. There's lots of opportunities to get what you want. It just can be somewhat challenging to work with DDS, but how you would do that is work with your DDS caseworker on getting the best program for your kid. One of the things which I didn't mention here on the DDS is when your kid turns 22, they have what's called an ISP meeting. You've all been through IEP meetings. ISP is the adult version of that. And your caseworker runs that meeting, and you go through, you know, what the person needs, where they're going, what their goals are for the next year. And that caseworker with DDS would be the person who would help you put together a program adapted to meet your kids' needs after they turn 22.
And then I think the budget clarifying question was self-direction budget.
Well, so the self-direction budget is supposed to be what the kid was supposed to get anyway, under the formula. That's the way it's supposed to work. I'm not sure DDS is actually doing it that way, but that's the way the law is that's the way the law is written.
Correct. I'm hearing no.
That it's not working that way. Yeah, I'm hearing that as well. But that's not the way it's supposed to work differently. And that's why we're working on the regulations at this point to see if we can get them to be what they're supposed to be.
And what I'm going to piggyback on Tom, as we're talking to you guys as parents, and you guys are about at the cusp of this, they're in the middle. MA21 is right now really talking and trying to drive some change in that. So as Tom said, go to the ARC of Massachusetts. There is so much work being done about this right now, and this is the time that your voices are critical. I'll put it in the chat too. So you guys, especially those that your sons and daughters are turning 22 in the next year, and you're looking to self-direct and use the Real Lives law, start blasting the legislators on this one, because it's coming from you guys is going to be more powerful than coming from us, even though we're advocating for it constantly. So definitely, because right, they're in limbo right now about how what the law says and how it's being implied. So there's a lot, like Tom said, a lot of work being put into that right now. So I'll put that in the chat as well. Another question, are we employing parents of special needs grown children? It may seem selfish question, but one parent is left to raise the special needs child. One must put their career on hold. I'm not sure what you're asking. Have given up our lives earning potential. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, the only thing that I can think of is that under Mass Health, under Mass Health, if your child's under a guardianship, or you can get PCA money to, the parent can get PCA money to provide supports for their child with a disability.
That, or there's the AFC program as well, adult family care. That can help as well, depending on the level of need.
So you can go back to Andrea on that with more questions.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? It's so personal.
Yeah,
so PCA, if they have Mass Health, either a PCA could be helping support the hours, or at AFC, which is, you can't have both, but they're both Mass Health funded programs. With the AFC model, the caregiver in the home gets a stipend to keep the child in the home, or the young adult in the home, or adult in the home, and you get a stipend to keep them there. So it's pros and cons to both of them, but certainly there are some things in place to kind of help families that are struggling with that. Last question, does AFC conflict with DDS residential placement? Tom, do you know much about AFC? No.
I do not.
So I could tell you, technically it's not supposed to. So that I'm going to put, being as
A lot of-
politically correct as I can, it is not supposed to conflict with it. Adult family care is a program that is put in place. It was actually a program for elders back in the day that was started to kind of give them a temporary place to be until they could be in a nursing home. So it was really a placeholder until they could find a placement. And then they kind of rolled it back into our population because they're trying to keep individuals in a home setting. So it should not replace conflict with residential if the person needs residential, and it's case by case. So the short answer is no. It's 12:50, Tom. What time did you need to?
I'll do 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Let me just, I got something. I try to save your chat, but I got things moving here. The next thing, yeah. So the next thing is really critically important. And we talked about this last week, because when your kid turns 18, you should be applying for a supplemental security income if they have a disability. Supplemental security income is really looked at disability. So if you have a disability, you have to go through the Social Security Administration to apply for it. If you get it, the number here, 934, is the amount you get in Massachusetts if you're collecting SSI after 18 and you don't live with your family. I think it's a few $100s lower if you do live with your family, but it's important that you apply for SSI or when the child is turning 18. It's also possible to get SSI if you're a low-income family for your child with a disability before the age of 18. And it's absolutely critical for an adult moving ahead to have the financial resources they need to be applying for a supplemental security income. If you go through, I think this presentation is going to have a link to apply for SSI, so you can just go on and apply through the Social Security Administration to do that. Any questions on that? It's critical to do this though. Oh, and once you're qualified for SSI, you automatically get in Massachusetts would be Mass Health. This is something that I think is useful for families to look at. I think before I really knew what was happening here, I always thought that you needed to have a whole lot of money to support your child with a disability. You needed to, get together, buy a big house and do all that kind of stuff. This is actually my son's budget and how it works for him. So like I said, he lives independently in his own apartment. So this is a breakdown of his income and expenses to see how this can work for families as they move ahead and how you can use government supports to support your individual with a disability once they become an adult, what that looks like. And I'm just going to go through this briefly. One is that his SSI payment is approximately $940 a month. And he also, at this point, is still getting $250 a month in the SNAP program, which is the federal food assistance program. The $250, I think, is going to be reduced maybe next month. It was raised to $250 during COVID, so it's been $250 for the last couple of years. That brings his total income to almost $1,200. And then looking at his expenses, his rent, like I said, he's under a Section 8 certificate, so he pays only 25% of his income, so he pays approximately $200 a month. He's a big sports fan and is all into that kind of stuff, so his internet and cable is $140 a month. His cell phone is $50 a month. Healthcare, he doesn't pay anything. If you're under Mass Health, you wouldn't pay anything either. All his medications are covered 100%. If he goes to get to the pharmacy, he has no charge for whatever he's getting. Support services, like I said, he gets 3 days of support services with a day program, and then he has 10 hours from a local community organization. That's all paid for by DDS. And then miscellaneous, I have it at $100, but it obviously varies a lot. So total expenses, oh, I think this is not, my numbers aren't good here. I'm sorry, I screwed up yeah, so he ends up with a surplus of a couple $100 a month. I screwed up my spreadsheet here. That gives him some leeway in that process. So I think it's important for families to understand that it's possible to put this type of package together with government benefits for your kid with a disability as they move forward. Any questions on this?
No, but it is 12:55, Tom. I'm trying to be respectful of
Oh,
your
all right. Let me just see. I'm just gonna. The last thing is just, we went through before, you should have special needs trusts in place. And then an ABLE account as well. You can apply for that just through Fidelity. The special needs trusts and powers of attorney and all that, you can actually go to, the special needs trusts online. The other thing is people below the age of 18, obviously guardianship and alternatives are important. And then letter of intent is also an important document to sort of the game plan for your child with a disability moving forward.
which is perfect because that's what we're doing next week.
Good.
So next